Hey friends, tonight we're easing into a story about a sound. It's the sound of a pantry door clicking shut, echoing in an empty room. It's the sound of a final coin being spent, the silence that follows being heavier than any weight. We're diving into a situation that feels all too modern, even though it's millennia old. The terrifying feeling of being completely, utterly tapped out. It's a story about what happens when nothing is all you have left, and it's a story that's perfect for that restless feeling late at night when our own worries try to crowd in. So before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy stories that connect faith to wealth. That's what I do here. I'd love to see where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world, so drop that in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins in the northern kingdom of Israel, in a village whose name is lost to time. We can imagine it easily enough. It's a clutter of small, sun-baked houses made of mud, brick and stone, crammed together on a dusty hillside. It was the kind of small town where everyone knew what you had for breakfast, mostly because you'd probably borrowed the grain to make it. The air smells of baked earth, livestock, and the faint smoky tang of cooking fires that are beginning to die down as evening approaches. And into this hot, still afternoon, a sound cuts through the quiet. It isn't a public spectacle. It's not the formal, theatrical wailing of a funeral procession. This sound is worse. It's the sound of private, unfiltered despair, and it's coming from behind the closed door of one of the smaller houses. Inside, a woman is weeping. She has moved past the crying elegantly into a handkerchief phase, if she ever had one, and is now squarely in the ugly crying so hard your sinuses might relocate territory. This is our protagonist. We don't know her name. The text simply calls her a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets. She is defined first by her loss, her widowhood, and second by her husband's association. She is crying because her world has ended. Not just emotionally, but financially, legally and socially. Her husband is gone. And in the ancient world, a husband wasn't just a partner, he was a provider, a legal shield, and a woman's entire connection to the economy. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a full-blown crisis. Let's picture her. She's likely sitting on the hard-packed earth floor of her main room. The silence in her house is so loud it's practically rude. Dust motes dance in the single shaft of light coming from the small high window. The room is bare. We can almost feel the rough texture of the wall as she leans against it, the coolness of the stone offering zero comfort. Her grief is a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. This isn't just sadness, this is panic. This was happening during a particularly messy time in Israel's history, around the 9th century BCE. The northern kingdom was politically unstable and spiritually chaotic. The shadow of Jezebel and the widespread worship of Baal still stained the land. It was a time of moral confusion and for many extreme economic hardship. This wasn't the glorious unified kingdom of Solomon. This was a fractured nation living paycheck to paycheck, and the social safety nets, well, they were full of holes. Her husband, we're told, was one of the sons of the prophets. This doesn't mean they were all teenagers. It was more like a guild or a brotherhood. They were men who had dedicated themselves to the service of God and to the ministry of prophets like Elijah and his successor Elisha. They were the counterculture, the ones resisting the slide into paganism. But here's the rub, being a full-time prophet in training didn't exactly come with a stellar benefits package. They were often poor, living by faith, and seen by the mainstream as, well, a bit weird. And now one of them was dead. His death had triggered a cascade of failures. While he was alive, his faith might have kept the wolves at bay, but now the wolves were at the door. The text says she cries out, and her cry is an accusation wrapped in a plea. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. You can hear the jagged edge in her voice. You know he was a good man. You know he was faithful. He did everything right. He followed you, Elisha. He served your God. And for what? To leave me here with nothing? The nothing was the problem. The pantry was bare. The money box was empty. She was in that terrible place between making it work and selling the furniture, except the furniture was probably already gone. This brings us to a fascinating and slightly strange tidbit about these ancient homes. They were built very close together, often sharing walls. Their design? with thick walls and small openings, was great for keeping cool, but it also meant sound travelled. A private cry of desperation in one house. The neighbours would have heard it, they would have known, and perhaps that was part of the agony, the shame of her poverty being public knowledge, even as she tried to hide it behind her door. Her weeping, however, is interrupted by a new, more immediate terror. Her grief is about the past, but her panic is about the very near future. The text is stark, and the creditor has come to take my 2 sons to be his slaves. This is the sound that finally breaks her. It's the sound of footsteps outside her door. Not the sympathetic footsteps of a neighbour bringing a small portion of flatbread, but the heavy, determined tread of the creditor. This is what has pushed her from sorrow into raw panic. Theologians still wonder whether her husband had only just died, or if this crisis was the final straw after months of slow-motion financial collapse. Had the creditor been patient, waiting a respectable time after the funeral, and his patience had finally run out? Or did he show up the very next day, scroll in hand, heartless and efficient? The text doesn't say, but it doesn't matter. He is here, now. And his demand is the cruelest imaginable. He wasn't there to repossess her donkey. She likely didn't have one. He wasn't there to take her house. It was probably mortgaged to the hilt or belonged to her husband's family. He was there to take her sons. This was a tragically legal and accepted practice in the ancient Near East, and even within Israel, despite laws intended to prevent it. It was called debt bondage, or debt slavery. If you couldn't pay your debts, your creditor could seize your assets. And if your only remaining assets were your children, they could be taken and forced to work until the debt was paid off. A debt that, conveniently for the creditor, often mysteriously ballooned with interest, making true repayment almost impossible. This is the cry we hear. It's the cry of a mother about to lose everything. She has already lost her husband to death. Now she's about to lose her sons to slavery. Her past is gone, her future is about to be auctioned off, and her present is a barren room. Her cry is the sound of absolute zero. It is the wail of someone who has hit the bottom so hard they've bounced. She has no options, no community support, no family to step in. Her husband's guild, the sons of the prophets, were likely just as poor as she was. They couldn't help. So she does the only thing she can think of. Her cry becomes an action. She runs, she bursts from her house, her face stained with tears and dust, and she makes for the one person who operates outside the normal rules of economics and despair. She runs to find the prophet Elisha. Her cry is the starting point of the entire miracle. It is the necessary vacuum that divine provision is about to fill. And this is our first quiet lesson for the night. Spiritual lesson. God often meets us not in our strength, but at the absolute end of our own resources. We spend so much time trying to present a polished, blessed version of ourselves to God. We try to fix our problems first, then bring him the tidy results. But this story starts in the messy, agonizing, undignified wreckage. Her cry, coming from a place of total emptiness, was the most honest prayer she could offer. It's a reminder that we don't need to have it all together to approach God. We just need to be honest, even if that honesty is just a raw sound of grief. His power isn't activated by our ability, but by our availability and our desperate, honest need. Her race through the village streets is a race of last resort. It's the lunge of a non-swimmer toward the only piece of driftwood in a raging sea. She has nothing. She knows she has nothing. And in that admission, the door for everything begins to creak open. This cry of panic, this primal shriek of the creditor has come, wasn't just a sudden, random disaster. It was the final, tragic and predictable chapter of a life that was supposed to have been righteous. To understand the widow's panic, we have to understand the man whose death caused it. Her whole plea to Elisha, the one she is rehearsing in her head as she stumbles through the dusty streets, hinges on this one fact. Your servant my husband is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. She's not just reminding Elisha of a name, she's invoking a reputation, she's reminding him of a choice. Her husband was one of the sons of the prophets. This, as we touched on, wasn't a genealogical term, it was a job title, a calling, a membership in a very exclusive and very broke club. Think of it as a roving seminary, a brotherhood of disciples, a countercultural guild of men who had dedicated their lives to the prophet Elisha, and before him the fiery whirlwind-riding Elijah. Their entire purpose was to be a dissenting voice in a kingdom that had gone spiritually insane. This was the era just after King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who had made the worship of the pagan god Baal the official state religion. They had put the prophets of God on a kill list, and they had sponsored a massive, wealthy and powerful pagan priesthood. To be a son of the prophet in this environment was not just a career choice, it was an act of political and spiritual treason. They were the resistance, and the resistance, as it so often is, was poor. This is the key to the whole story. Her husband's community didn't have a headquarters. They lived in communal compounds, often on the outskirts of towns like Jericho or Bethel, literally building their own shelters, as we see in a later story where one of them loses a borrowed axe head in the river. They were so poor that their communal meals were a constant source of divine intervention. In this very same chapter of 2 Kings, we see Elisha having to purify a pot of poisoned stew for them, because they were so hungry they'd gathered wild poisonous gourds by mistake. Just a few verses later, a man brings Elisha 20 barley loaves, and the prophet has to multiply them, fishes and loaves style, just to feed 100 of these men. These guys were, to put it mildly, starving. They were the biblical equivalent of broke postgrad students, living entirely on faith and the occasional donation from the few faithful left in Israel. So when the widow says her husband feared the Lord, she means he chose this. He actively rejected the mainstream economy. He could have trimmed his beliefs, taken a nice quiet government job, maybe tended an olive grove, and paid his respects to Baal on the high holidays like everyone else. He would have been comfortable, he would have been secure, he would have had a small savings, but he chose not to. He chose the prophet's compound. He chose the life of devotion, of study, of prayer, and of systemic poverty. His piety was his poverty. This was a time of radical religious movements. We read in other parts of the Bible about groups like the Nazarites. Think of Samson, who took strict personal vows to not cut their hair or drink wine, as a sign of special dedication. The sons of the prophets were a different kind of radical, a communal one. They were the back to the land movement of their day, protesting the corruption of the cities and the court, and like most of those movements, they were fantastic at spiritual purity and terrible at financial planning. The husband was all in on spiritual currency, but the creditor, who was now looming, was from the First National Bank of "What have you done for me lately?" and he was here to foreclose. This brings us to the debt itself. Theologians still debate the source of this crippling debt. How could a man so devout who had no worldly possessions rack up a bill so high that it cost the future of his 2 sons? The text is silent, but the possibilities are heartbreaking. It was almost certainly not a loan for a chariot or a new extension on the house. It was likely a survival loan, a loan for grain during one of the region's frequent droughts, a loan to pay the king's oppressive taxes. Some Jewish traditions even suggest a more poignant theory, that her husband had borrowed the money specifically to support and hide other prophets when Jezebel was actively hunting them down. If this is true, his debt wasn't a mistake. It was an act of heroic righteousness. He had mortgaged his family's future to save the lives of his brothers. It makes the creditor's arrival even more bitter. And why couldn't the other sons of the prophets help? Why couldn't they pass the hat? It would be like one destitute monk asking his fellow destitute monks to cover his mortgage. They'd all just look at each other, nod sadly, and offer to share their watery stew. They had nothing. This wasn't a community with a rainy day fund. Their entire philosophy was, God will provide the rain. And right now, spiritually and financially, there was a drought. The widow's husband had left her with only 2 things, his sons and his reputation. His reputation as a man who feared the Lord was her only asset. It was the password that she was gripping tight as she ran toward Elisha. It was the only reason she could even dare to approach the man of God and demand his attention. She wasn't just a random beggar. She was family. She was the widow of one of his own men. This wasn't just a social problem, it was an in-house crisis, and she was about to make it Elisha's problem. Her husband's life of faith and poverty had set the stage. His death had pulled the curtain, and now, standing in the doorway of her small bare house, was the consequence of it all. A man who didn't care one bit about the fear of the Lord. He didn't care about piety or faith or the sacrifices of a righteous man. He was a man of the world. He only cared about the bottom line, the clink of a coin, or the price her 2 sons would fetch at the slave auction. And he was here to collect. This is the awful, quiet truth at the heart of this story. Our lesson for tonight. Spiritual lesson: our faithful choices can sometimes create our greatest hardships. We're often told that if we follow God, if we make the right choices and live a life of faith, everything will be easy, that God will smooth the path and guarantee our comfort. This story just rips that idea to shreds. This man did everything right according to his calling. He rejected idolatry, he served the prophet, he feared God, and the result? His family was left destitute and on the brink of destruction. His faith didn't get him a pass from hardship. His faith was the reason for his hardship. He chose God over gold, and his widow and sons were now paying the brutal price. It's a chilling reminder that God's economy and man's economy are almost never aligned. The story isn't about how faith prevents problems. It's about how God is forced to intervene within our problems, often in ways we could never ever see coming, because the very world system is set against those who follow him. The husband's choice had led his family to a dead end, and at that dead end, a knock came on the door. The sound of that knock on the door is the axle on which this entire story turns. It's not a polite, hesitant tap-tap of a neighbour. It's the hard, impatient, wooden thud of a man who has come to collect. It's the sound of the secular world, a world of contracts and consequences, crashing into this small house of faith and grief. This man, the creditor, is the villain of our story, but in his own mind he's just a businessman. He is the personification of the system. He's not here to be cruel, he's here to balance the books. The widow's husband made a deal. He took a loan, he agreed to the terms, and the terms, in the 9th century BCE, were brutal and stark. This is where we have to understand the terrifying reality of debt in the ancient Near East. In our modern world, if you default on a loan, you face a barrage of emails, endless phone calls, a ruined credit score, and maybe, just maybe, a court summons. In the widow's world, the consequences were immediate, physical, and devastating. The law of Moses, found in books like Exodus and Deuteronomy, actually had provisions to prevent this very scenario. It was designed to create a more compassionate economy. It explicitly forbade charging interest, usury, on loans to fellow Israelites, especially the poor. It commanded that debts be forgiven every 7 years. It even stated that if a person did have to sell themselves into servitude to pay a debt, they were to be treated not as a slave, but as a hired hand, and were to be set free in the sabbatical year. But as we know, there's often a Grand Canyon-sized gap between what the law says and what people do. By Elisha's time, especially in the northern kingdom, which had long since abandoned true worship of God, these compassionate laws were largely ignored, especially by the wealthy and powerful. The system had reverted to the much harsher, more common practices of their pagan neighbours in Mesopotamia, like the Babylonians or Assyrians, and their rule was simple: a debt must be paid by any means necessary. When the creditor knocked on that door, he had a legal binding claim. The widow had no money, she had no property, she had no assets, except two: her sons. Under this ruthless system, her sons were not seen as her children, they were seen as chattel. They were her movable property, they had a market value. The creditor wasn't there to throw her in jail, what good would that do? He was there to seize the only things of value she had left, to cover her husband's default. Let's pause and feel the cold dread of that moment. The widow, her eyes swollen, opens the door to this man. He's probably not a cartoon villain twisting his moustache. He might be a local landowner, a wealthy grain merchant, someone she's known her whole life. He might even be reasonable, speaking in a calm, firm voice. "Ma'am, I've given you time. I have a family to feed too. The debt is past due. I'm here for the boys." He wasn't going to murder them. He was going to take them. They would be marched from her home, put on an auction block in the village square, or simply taken directly to his own estate. They would become his slaves. They would work his fields, tend his livestock, or serve in his house for, well, possibly forever. This is the grim and quirky tidbit of ancient economies. Debt slavery was a far more common fate than chattel slavery, being captured in war. Millions of people across the ancient world lived and died as slaves, not because they were conquered, but because their father had a bad harvest. The widow's sons were likely young, not toddlers, but perhaps just entering their teenage years, old enough to be strong and useful. This was the moment her panic crystallized into pure terror. This man wasn't just taking her future security, he was taking her past. He was taking the last living pieces of her husband, he was erasing her family line, And this is why she ran. She didn't plead with the creditor. She didn't bargain. She knew it was useless. He had the law, or at least the common practice, on his side. You cannot argue with the man who holds the note. Her only hope was to find someone who operated under a higher law. This brings us to the great theological puzzle of the story. Theologians still wrestle with the sheer injustice of this moment. Why would God allow this? Why would a righteous man's family be subjected to the most predatory and cruel aspects of a fallen economic system? If God is just, where is the justice for this widow? The story suggests something profound. God's justice doesn't always work by preventing the knock on the door. His justice, in this case, was about to work by providing a miraculous answer to the knock. The crisis, the injustice, the terrifying threat, all of it was real. The creditor was not a phantom. The debt was not imaginary. The threat of slavery was not a bad dream. The problem was 100% secular, 100% financial, and 100% terrifying. The creditor represents the unfeeling, mechanical nature of the world system. The world runs on what do you have? It runs on collateral. It runs on assets. It runs on repayment. It has no room for mercy, no line item for faith, no collateral in a righteous reputation. The creditor at the door is the voice that says, "You're out of time and you're out of options. The bill is due." We've all heard that knock, haven't we? It might not be a literal creditor, but it's the final notice email. It's the doctor's report. It's the sound of the car engine refusing to turn over when you have to get to that job interview. It's the moment our own carefully constructed plans fall apart and we are left staring at a bill we simply cannot pay. It is the moment we realise we are utterly, completely bankrupt, financially, emotionally, or spiritually. The widow's husband had lived a life of faith, but he died in debt. And that debt had a due date. So she runs. She leaves the creditor standing at the door. We can imagine her begging him, "Wait, just wait, I'm going to get the money." And she flees. She runs through the village, past the stares of her neighbours, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She's not running from her problem as much as she's running to her only possible solution. She's running to find the one man on earth who, she believes, can make something out of nothing. She is running to the man of God. Spiritual lesson. The world will always come to collect, but its claims do not have the final say. The creditor, with his legal rights and his unfeeling demands, represents the law in its many forms. He represents the system of sin and death, the ledger of our own failures, the what you deserve of a broken world, and he is relentless. He will always show up at the door demanding payment, and we, on our own, are just as bankrupt as the widow. We have nothing to offer. This is the bad news. But the good news of this story, the hope she's running toward, is that there is another economy at play. There is a system of grace. The creditor's knock is loud, but it is not the only sound. The story is poised on this razor's edge. Will the unfeeling law of the world win, or will the impossible grace of God provide a new, unheard-of answer? The widow is betting her son's lives on the latter. She's running to find Elisha, the man who speaks for the God who can and does cancel debts. She ran. She didn't just walk briskly. She didn't gather her shawl and go for a purposeful stroll. She burst out of her own doorway, leaving the creditor standing on the threshold, a black silhouette of a man blocking the light. We can almost hear her gasp, "Wait, just wait," before she took off, hiking her skirts and running with the kind of wild, ungraceful desperation that only comes when your children's lives are on the line. Her feet, likely in thin leather sandals, slapped against the hot, packed earth of the village streets. This was not a private journey. This was a 9th century BCE small town. There was no privacy. Every neighbour was a spectator. As she sprinted past the low clustered houses, we can imagine faces appearing in the small doorways, eyes peering through latticed windows. There's Mrs. Shimei, who was probably just about to grind her afternoon grain, now standing still watching the spectacle. There are the old men sitting in the sliver of shade by the village wall, their conversation stopping mid-sentence. They all knew her. They all knew her husband had died. They all knew she was poor. And now, seeing her run like a madwoman, face blotched with tears and streaked with dust, her hair likely unbound in a sign of extreme distress, they all knew the crisis had finally arrived. It was the ancient equivalent of a police car with sirens blaring pulling up to your house, and she was the one with the emergency. It was public, it was humiliating, and she did not have the energy to care. Her lungs burned. The air was hot and dry. Every step was a prayer. Every gasp was an accusation. He has to help me. He has to help me. God, where are you? He knew my husband. He knows he was faithful. This cannot be the end. Her mind was a whirlwind of the ticking clock. The creditor was at her house. He was a man of the world, a man of ledgers and contracts. He was not going to wait long. He had places to be, other debts to collect. He might give her an hour if she was lucky. He might give her 10 minutes. He might, at this very second, be losing patience, shrugging his shoulders, and stepping inside her home to lay his hands on her sons. This terror gave her speed. This was her walk of last resort. She had exhausted every other option. We can be sure of it. She had, in the weeks and months since her husband's death, already pleaded with her neighbours. They had given what they could. A handful of dates, a small measure of flour, but they were poor too. She had likely gone to her husband's family if he had any nearby, but they may have been just as destitute or, worse, unwilling. She had probably already tried to bargain with the creditor, promising to work to pay him back in instalments. He had refused. He wanted the only thing of value she had left. So she ran to Elisha. Where was he? He wasn't a king in a palace. He was an itinerant prophet. But a man of his spiritual stature, the leader of the prophetic guild, would have been known. He was likely staying in a modest house in the village, or perhaps in the nearby prophetic commune where her husband had lived. She knew where to find him. He was the village's nuclear option, the man you went to when the world had failed you. This was not a casual visit. There was a protocol for approaching a holy man, a man of God. You were supposed to come with deference, with a gift, if you had one, with a bowed head. Later in this very same chapter, a wealthy Shunammite woman will come to Elisha in her own grief, and she will fall and catch him by the feet, a formal act of supplication. Our widow has no time for such niceties. She's not coming with a gift. She's coming as a gift-wrapped catastrophe. She's not coming to bow, she's coming to shout. She's a mother bear, and her cubs are in a trap. It's a quirky and often overlooked part of ancient culture. How do you get a holy man's attention? You're not supposed to interrupt him. He might be in prayer or teaching or in a divine trance. The etiquette was to wait to be announced. But our widow is about to violate every social grace, and it is this very violation, this raw, unfiltered, rule-breaking desperation that signals the depth of her crisis. She arrives at the house, a simple and nondescript building just like her own. She doesn't knock politely. She pounds on the door or perhaps shoves it open and falls into the room gasping. And there he is, Elisha. We can picture him. He's not an old frail mystic. He's a vigorous man, the leader of a tough-as-nails spiritual resistance. He might have been sitting with his own disciples or in quiet contemplation. And suddenly, this dishevelled, weeping, hyperventilating woman is at his feet, grabbing his robe. Her cry is no longer the sound of grief. It is the sound of a demand. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 sons to be his slaves. She lays it all out, the facts, the injustice, the timeline, the stakes. Notice what she's doing. She's appealing to Elisha's knowledge and his relationship. You know he was faithful. This is an appeal to loyalty. He was your servant. This is an appeal to responsibility. She is, in no uncertain terms, telling the prophet of God that the system he represents has failed her. Her husband's faith, his service to Elisha's God, has resulted in the total destruction of his family. Theologians and scholars still debate whether the widow's desperate approach was an act of profound faith, or simply the last scream of a cornered animal. Was she thinking, I know Elisha serves a miracle-working God who will provide, or was she just thinking, he's the only person of influence I know, and I'm going to make him fix this? The truth is, it doesn't matter. Her faith was not a calm, intellectual assent to a set of doctrines. Her faith was in her feet. Her faith was in the pounding of the door. Her faith was in the unashamed, desperate wail she let loose in the prophet's house. She didn't run to the mayor. She didn't run to the village elder. She didn't run to the creditor's boss. She ran to the one man who operated in a different economy. She ran to the man who represented the God of the impossible. This was a supernatural problem, and she knew instinctively that it required a supernatural solution. She's now kneeling on his floor, having made her case, and the room is silent. Elisha just looks at her. The moment stretches. Her entire future and the future of her sons hangs in this terrible breathless silence. She has done the only thing she could do. She has taken her absolute nothing and brought it to the one person who might see something in it. Spiritual lesson. True faith is rarely passive. It is a desperate, active movement toward God. We often romanticize faith as a peaceful, quiet state of being. We think of it as sitting calmly in the storm, trusting that things will work out. But this widow shows us a different side of faith. This is running through the streets faith. This is pounding on the door faith. This is shouting at the man of God faith. She didn't just pray and wait. Her prayer was her running. Her prayer was her showing up, unannounced and uninvited, a total mess and refusing to be ignored. Sometimes faith isn't a feeling. It's a verb. It's an act of will. It's the decision to get up, leave the creditor at the door and run with all your might toward the only one who can rewrite the end of your story. She has done her part. She has run her race. Now she waits, breathless, for Elisha to speak. The echoes of the widow's desperate cry, "The creditor has come to take my 2 sons," hang in the small, stuffy room. She's a heap on the floor, all her energy spent in that frantic run and that final agonizing plea. She's trembling, gasping for air, her eyes fixed on the man of God, waiting for his reaction. And Elisha is calm. This is perhaps the first subtle miracle of the story. He doesn't panic. He doesn't wring his hands. He doesn't leap to his feet and shout, "This is an outrage," to the mayor. He doesn't offer her the ancient equivalent of thoughts and prayers. He doesn't even immediately say, "Don't worry, God will provide." His reaction is, at first glance, almost cold. It's the calm of a surgeon, an engineer, or a general who has just been handed a report that the enemy has broken the perimeter. He absorbs the panic, processes the facts, and then he does something simple. He speaks. He looks down at this shattered woman, and he asks a formal, almost legalistic question. "What shall I do for you?" Let's just sit with that for a second. It's such a strange question. It's the kind of thing a king asks a subject, or a genie asks the person who rubbed the lamp. "What shall I do for you?" She just told him what he needs to do. Get the creditor to go away, save my sons, give me some money. Her problem could not be more obvious, but the question is profound. He is, in this moment, forcing her to move past her panic and articulate a solution. He's not just acknowledging her problem, he's inviting her to be part of the answer. It's a question that transfers a small bit of agency back to her, the person who feels she has none. And before she can even stammer out a reply, before she can say, "I don't know," or do anything, he follows it with a second question. This one is sharper, it's more practical. It's the question that cuts through the grief, the fear, and the injustice, and gets right to the heart of the matter. "Tell me," he says, his voice steady, "what do you have in the house?" This is the pivot. This is the moment the entire story balances on. Imagine her confusion. Her mind must have reeled. What do I have? Did he not hear me? I have nothing. I have 2 sons who are about to be slaves. I have a creditor at the door. I have a broken heart. I have the clothes on my back. I have dust on the floor. I have nothing. That's the whole point. This question must have felt like a slap. It's so practical. It's so unspiritual. She's come for a miracle, for a divine intervention, for a thunderbolt from heaven. And the prophet starts by asking to do a household inventory. It's like going to the emergency room with a severed artery and the doctor asking if you've got any band-aids in your purse. This question reveals the fundamental operating procedure of the kingdom of God. God, it seems, very rarely creates ex nihilo, out of nothing, after the initial Genesis creation. Instead, his method is almost always to multiply ex parvo, out of a little. He starts with what is already there, no matter how tiny, how insignificant, or how useless it may seem. He started with Moses' staff, a dead stick of wood. He started with David's slingshot, a shepherd's toy. He would later start with a boy's lunch of 5 loaves and 2 fish. God's economy is not one of spontaneous generation, is one of supernatural multiplication. But to multiply something, he first needs the something. This brings us to a simple historical fact about her house. When Elisha asks, "What do you have?" we need to understand the profound, echoing emptiness of a poor widow's home in the 9th century BCE. A peasant house was typically 1 or 2 small, dark rooms. The furniture would consist of a sleeping mat rolled up in the corner, a small built-in clay oven for baking, a set of grinding stones for flour, and pottery. Everything was stored in clay pots. She would have had a pot for water, a pot for any grain she had, which was now empty, and maybe a small pot for olive oil. There was no pantry full of stuff. There were no closets. There was no attic. Taking inventory would take approximately 5 seconds. Elisha's question forces her to stop looking at the creditor outside the door and turn around, to look back into the bare, familiar emptiness of her own home. It forces her to scan the room, not for what's missing, but for what is left. Theologians still debate why Elisha asked this question at all. Was he genuinely unaware of her poverty? Unlikely, given her husband's community. Was he assessing her material resources, trying to find something he could tell her to sell? Or was this a test? Was it a test of her honesty, to see if she would admit to the one tiny thing she might have, or if she'd just stick to her I have nothing story? Was it a test of her awareness, to see if she had any idea of the miracle that was about to be seeded? And here's a quirky tidbit. In that part of the world, it was common for homes, even poor ones, to have small household gods, teraphim. These were little idols, figurines, or amulets that were kept for good luck, for fertility, or for protection. They were a kind of spiritual insurance policy, a pagan superstition. We see them pop up all through the Old Testament, even in good families like Rachel's. But this widow's house, as the wife of a son of the prophets, a man who feared the Lord, her home would have been conspicuously radically empty of any such thing. Her nothing was a testament to her husband's exclusive faith. She had no other gods, no other charms, no other source of help. She had only Elisha. So Elisha's question is forcing her to see that her complete and total nothing is actually the perfect blank canvas for God. She's still on the floor, confused. She's mentally scanning. The mat? No. The grinding stone? Worthless. The water pot? It's just water. Her mind is sifting through the emptiness, trying to find an answer for this strange, calm man. And this is where she has to stop. She has to stop crying. She has to think. She has to take a breath and answer the single most important question of her life. What do you have in the house? Spiritual lesson. God's provision almost always begins with an honest inventory of what we already possess. We are so often like this widow. We come to God with our big, scary, creditor at the door problems. We shout, we cry, we panic, and we present him with our profound nothing. We're experts at what we lack. And God, just like Elisha, calmly interrupts our panic and asks, I understand. Now tell me, what do you have? He wants us to turn our eyes from the size of our debt to the seed of our deliverance. This is a terrifying moment, because it forces us to be honest. It forces us to stop saying, I have nothing, and start saying, well, I have this one tiny, useless-seeming thing. And that right there is where the miracle is hiding. God is not waiting for you to have enough. He is waiting for you to identify your little. He's waiting for the inventory. Elisha's question hangs in the air, a spotlight in the dark, dusty room. Tell me, what do you have in the house? The widow, still kneeling, freezes. Her mind, which had been a screaming chaos of creditors and slavery, is forced to slam to a halt and perform the saddest, shortest inventory in history. She's no longer in the prophet's house in her mind. She's mentally back in her own home, her eyes scanning the familiar, heartbreaking emptiness. What does she have? The room is small, the floor is packed earth. In one corner, the sleeping mats for her and her 2 sons are rolled up. They're probably threadbare, worthless. In another corner, a small low oven made of clay, cold and grey. Beside it, the 2 heavy basalt grinding stones, worthless unless you have grain to grind, which she doesn't. There's a large clay pot for water filled from the village well. It's heavy, but its contents are free, worthless. There's a wooden chest, perhaps, holding the few items of clothing her husband left. The clothes her sons are growing into, worthless. There are no bags of barley. There are no skins of wine. There are no dried figs or dates. There is no silver, not a single shekel hidden under a floor stone. The money box is an empty wooden shell. This is the crushing reality of absolute poverty. It's not just about being out of money. It's about being out of options. It's the state of having nothing to sell, nothing to barter, nothing to leverage. Her shoulders, which had been tense with panic, now slump in a different kind of despair. the despair of utter emptiness. She looks up at Elisha and her voice is probably a hollow whisper. "Your maidservant has nothing in the house." This is her answer, nothing. It is the official, final declaration of her bankruptcy. She is confirming the prophet's worst fears. She has no collateral. She has no seed. She has no something for God to multiply. She is a black hole of need. And this, right here, is the moment of truth for so many people. It's the moment we declare our own emptiness. We say, "God, I have nothing. I have no talent. I have no energy. I have no faith. I have no hope. I have nothing." And we say it as a full stop. We say it as the end of the story. But the widow, in her profound honesty, cannot tell a lie. Even in her desolation, there is a flicker of meticulous, almost pedantic honesty. As she's about to give up, her mental inventory snags on one tiny forgotten object. Her answer, which began as a full stop, becomes a comma. Nothing in the house except, oh, that glorious, redeeming, miracle-birthing word, except. It's almost as if she's embarrassed to even mention it. It's so small, it's so trivial, it's so useless. It has no bearing on her problem. The creditor doesn't want it. It can't feed her sons. It can't pay a debt. It is, for all intents and purposes, part of the nothing. Except a pot of oil. This is it. This is the seed. This is the something that Elisha was looking for. Let's understand what this pot of oil was. The word in Hebrew is esk, which means a small earthenware flask or jar, specifically for anointing or for perfumed oil. This was not a cad, a large storage jar for cooking oil. This wasn't the giant 3-foot-tall vat of olive oil that a wealthy family would have in their pantry for cooking and lamps. No, this was almost certainly a small decorative personal item. It might have been the last remnant of her wedding dowry. It might have been a special anointing oil her husband used in his prophetic duties. It was a flask. We might picture something you could hold in one hand, maybe containing a pint at the absolute most. This is a fascinating historical tidbit. Olive oil in the ancient world was the all-purpose duct tape of life. It was fuel for lamps, it was food for cooking, it was medicine for wounds, it was a cosmetic for skin, and it was a sacred substance for anointing. Its quality varied wildly, from the thick green sludge used for lamps to the clear, fragrant virgin oil used for sacred purposes or as a luxury perfume. The widow's jar was likely the latter. It was special. It was the one tiny luxury she had left, a final, fragrant reminder of a life that was now gone, and it was utterly, completely insufficient for her current problem. You couldn't pay a debt with a half-empty bottle of expensive perfume. It was, in a very real sense, nothing. Theologians and scholars have long wondered about the symbolism of this single pot of oil. Was it a symbol of the Holy Spirit, the anointing that still rested on this house of a prophet? Was it a sign that even in our darkest moments, there is a remnant of grace, a remnant of consecration that God can use? Or was it just a pot of oil? The text, in its beautiful simplicity, doesn't say. It just presents it as a fact. This is what she had. Her assessment of her situation was this: I have nothing except this one useless, tiny thing. And Elisha, upon hearing this, doesn't laugh. He doesn't say, "That's it? I can't work with that." He doesn't roll his eyes at her pathetic inventory. Instead, we can imagine the faintest hint of a smile. We can imagine a spark in his eyes. He has his something. He has the seed. The panic in the room has just subsided, replaced by a new, strange, electric stillness. The widow has no idea what's coming. She's just given her honest, if slightly embarrassing, answer. She has one pot of oil. This is the inventory of nothing. It's the moment of profound emptiness. She has nothing left to hide, no secret stash, no plan B. She has her sons, her debt, and a small flask of anointing oil. Spiritual lesson: the accept that you dismiss is often the exactly that God intends to use. We are masters of dismissing our own resources. We look at our lives and say, I have nothing, I have no connections, I have no money, I have no great talents. And then, as an afterthought, we add the except. I have nothing, except I'm a pretty good listener. I have nothing, except I can cook a decent meal. I have nothing, except this one tiny idea. We, like the widow, see our accept as an extension of our nothing. It's the trivial, embarrassing, insufficient footnote to our lack. But God, the master of multiplication, sees that footnote as the headline. He zeroes in on that one dismissed useless thing. He's not interested in the nothing. He's interested in the except. This story pivots on her ability to be so completely honest that she mentions the one thing a more prideful person might have omitted. She didn't hide it. She didn't say, well, that's private, it's personal, it doesn't count. She just laid it all bare. I have nothing except this. And in that moment, she handed Elisha all the raw material he needed for the miracle. Except a pot of oil. The words hang in the room. The widow has confessed her nothing, and as a final trivial addendum, she has confessed her something. A tiny flask of oil. Elisha's demeanour changes. The calm, assessing prophet is gone, replaced by a man of sudden, decisive action. He has what he needs. He has the seed. Now he needs a field to plant it in. He looks at the widow, and his next command is so strange, so counterintuitive, that it must have sounded like madness. He doesn't say, "Great, bring me the oil, and I will pray over it, and it will become a giant block of gold." He doesn't say, "Okay, take that oil to the market and sell it for a few coins." Instead, he says, "Go." He's sending her back to the village, back past the nosy neighbours, back towards her house, where the creditor is still waiting. Go, borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbours, empty vessels, do not gather just a few. Let us be very clear about how insane this instruction is. First, he tells her to borrow. This woman is already in catastrophic family-ending debt. Her entire crisis stems from a loan she cannot repay, and the prophet's first instruction is to go deeper into debt. Not debt of money, but debt of things. She has to go door to door, to the very people who have probably already written her off, and ask for a favour. Second, he tells her to borrow from all your neighbours, not just her best friend, not just her one sympathetic cousin, everyone. He wants her to conduct a village-wide scavenger hunt. This is the very definition of public humiliation. She, the woman whose husband died a bankrupt, the woman whose sons are about to be dragged off to the slave block, must now walk to every single house and say, "Pardon me, Mrs. Shimei, I know I'm the town charity case, but could I borrow your empty pots?" Third, he specifies what to borrow, empty vessels. This is the beautiful, quiet poetry of the miracle. He is asking her to go and gather her lack and bring it to him. Her problem is emptiness. Her house is empty. Her pantry is empty. Her future is empty. And Elisha's solution is to go and collect more emptiness. He is in effect telling her to prepare a physical, tangible container for the miracle God is about to pour out. He's not just solving her debt, he's about to fill her emptiness. And then, the kicker. The final, terrifying command: do not gather just a few. In other words, get as many as you can. The size of this miracle is not going to be determined by my power. It's going to be determined by your obedience and your capacity. He is right here handing her the reins. The how much of her deliverance is now entirely up to her. A few pots? She'll get a small provision. 100 pots? She'll get an overwhelming abundance. This is the except of the oil. That one small, useless-seeming flask of anointing oil. This is the seed. And all the empty pots she's about to gather, this is the field. The miracle is going to be a collaboration. God provides the supernatural seed, the multiplying oil, but the widow must provide the human capacity, the empty pots. This moment is the first major test of her faith. It's one thing to run to the prophet in a blind panic. It's another thing entirely to obey a command that makes no logical sense and requires you to face the very community you're hiding from in shame. Imagine the widow's perspective. She's still on her knees. Elisha has just given her this bizarre multi-step business plan. Step 1, go humiliate yourself. Step 2, collect a massive amount of nothing. Step 3, he hasn't even told her step 3 yet. And what about the creditor? He's still at the door. Theologians and scholars often point out that Elisha's command completely ignores the urgent ticking clock. The man of God seems unbothered by the crisis that just moments before was a matter of life and death. He doesn't say, first, tell the creditor to wait. He just gives her this strange assignment, as if the creditor doesn't even exist. He is in this moment demanding that she operate on God's time, not the creditor's. He's forcing her to act as if the solution is already guaranteed, even though not a single coin has appeared. This forgotten except for one thing jar of oil is suddenly the most important object in the world. It was the last disregarded remnant of her old life. Now it's the key to her new one. It's a quirky historical fact that oil was, itself, a form of currency. In an agrarian society, a large jar of high-quality olive oil was a valuable commodity, but a small assok of anointing oil was different. It wasn't a commodity, it was a personal effect. It was nothing in the marketplace, but in God's economy, it was everything. It was the one thing in her house that was consecrated, the one thing set apart, the one thing that still held a memory of holiness, of her husband's faith, of an anointing. And God was about to take that tiny, fragrant accept and use it to drown her debt. The widow's journey of faith has just taken a sharp, unexpected turn. She came to Elisha for a rescue. He has given her an assignment. She came for a handout. He has given her a harvest plan. She came for a quick fix. He has given her a bizarre and humiliating task. And now she has a choice. She can argue. But Elisha, what about the creditor? He'll take my sons while I'm out pot hunting. She can balk. I can't ask my neighbours. It's too embarrassing. She can question. What good will empty pots do? This is madness. Or she can get up, pull her shawl tight, wipe her nose and obey. Spiritual lesson. God's instructions often seem illogical from the world's perspective. When we're in a crisis, we want a solution that makes sense to us. If we have a financial problem, we want a check. If we have a relational problem, we want the other person to apologize. If we have a health problem, we want a magic pill. But God's solutions rarely follow our logic. He tells Naaman, the mighty general with leprosy, to go dip 7 times in a muddy river. He tells Gideon, the fearful soldier, to defeat an army of thousands with 300 men carrying clay pots and torches. And he tells this widow, who is drowning in debt, to go borrow more, empty pots. His instructions are designed to do 2 things: solve the problem and build our faith. And the faith-building part often requires us to do something that makes absolutely no worldly sense. It requires us to trust his command more than we trust our crisis. The oil was her accept. The instruction was her test. The widow is on her feet. The command, go, borrow vessels, do not gather just a few, is echoing in her ears. It is without question the strangest instruction she has ever received. But it is an instruction. It is an action. And action is better than the paralytic panic she was in just moments before. She likely just nods. There are no words. What could she say? Righto, pot hunting it is? She gives the man of God a look of, well, we can only guess. Was it dazed trust? Was it sheer terror? It was probably a cocktail of both. She turns and walks out of his house, back into the blazing, unsympathetic sunlight. Her first steps are the hardest. She's now walking away from the prophet, the source of comfort, and toward her problem, which is still standing at her front door. The creditor. She had run past him in a blur of panic. Now she has to walk back slowly, with purpose. He sees her coming. We can imagine him shifting his weight, his arms crossed, his face a mask of impatience. Well, his expression says, did you find some rich uncle? Did the prophet give you a bag of silver? And the widow? What does she do? Elisha gave her no script for this part. This is her first, unscripted moment of obedience. She has to face the man who wants to enslave her sons, and she has to do it with nothing in her hands but a bizarre, nonsensical errand. She probably doesn't even make eye contact. She puts her head down and walks straight toward her own door. Ma'am, I'm waiting, the creditor says, his voice hard. She might have whispered, just wait. Or perhaps in a sudden, unexplainable burst of Elisha-inspired confidence, she says, I'm handling it, with a force that surprises even herself. Or maybe, and this is my favourite theory, she just ignores him completely. She treats him like a piece of furniture, a temporary obstacle, and pushes past him into her own home. She has a command from the man of God. The creditor and his demands are now an annoying distraction from her actual work. She has to go get pots. She walks into her small, empty house, and for a moment the silence is deafening. Her 2 sons are huddled in the corner, their eyes wide with fear. They watched her run out, they watched the creditor wait, and now they watch her walk back in, empty-handed. Their faces fall. This is it. She's failed. She looks at her boys and her heart breaks all over again. Then she takes a breath. Go, she says to them, her voice rough. Go to our neighbours. Go to every house. Ask them. Ask them if we can borrow their empty jars. All of them. The boys just stare. Their mother has officially lost her mind. But why? One of them, the older one, might ask. Because the prophet said so. Don't ask questions. Just go and get as many as you can. She grabs the younger one by the hand and pulls him out the door, leaving the older one to stare after them in confusion before finally scrambling to follow. The creditor, still at the door, just scoffs. Empty jars. The woman is delirious with grief. He leans back against the wall, resigned to wait. He'll give her an hour for this charade, and then he's taking the boys. Now begins the walk of shame. The widow and her 2 sons split up, a tiny, desperate team. She turns to the house on the right, her closest neighbour, Mrs. Shimei. She raises a trembling hand and knocks. The door creaks open. Mrs. Shimei's face is a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Yes? Is everything all right? We saw the creditor, we saw you run. And the widow, her throat dry, has to say the words. Mrs. Shimei, I need a favour. The prophet Elisha sent me. I need to borrow your empty vessels. Mrs. Shimei blinks. My pots? What for? I can't explain. He just said to get them. All of them. The empty ones. Please. This is the humiliation. In the ancient world, village life was built on a strict, unspoken code of reciprocity. You borrowed a cup of flour, you paid back a cup of flour, maybe with a few dates as interest. You helped a man harvest his barley, he helped you shear your sheep. It was a fragile, closed-loop economy. The widow's request shatters this code. She's not borrowing with any hope of repaying. She's a known bad debt risk. She is publicly, officially asking for a handout. She's moving from struggling neighbour to town beggar. Every knock is an admission of her total failure. Mrs. Shimei, probably thinking the prophet is a quack and the widow's a lost cause, shrugs. I suppose. I have the big water jar and a few cooking pots I'm not using. Take them. Just bring them back. The widow nods, her face burning, and takes the heavy clay pots. She carries them back to her house, her sons doing the same, and sets them on the floor. The creditor watches, unimpressed. Her house, which was heartbreakingly empty, now starts to fill up, with more emptiness. Now to the next house, and the next, and the next. This is the gauntlet. Each door is a new wave of shame. Some neighbours are kind. Of course, dear. Take what you need. Is he helping you? Some are suspicious. Borrow? My pots? What if you break them? Who's going to replace them? You? Some are probably just plain mean. Haven't you taken enough? Your husband's debts are a disgrace to this village. Now you want my pottery? Go away. And with every refusal, she has to swallow her pride and move to the next door. With every yes, she has to accept the look of pity, the unspoken charity, and carry the heavy, awkward jars back home. Here's a quirky tidbit about this assignment. A pot wasn't just a pot. In a house with no furniture, pots were the furniture. They had huge pithoi that stood 3 or 4 feet tall, where they'd store grain for the entire winter. They had smaller jars for water, flasks for oil, pots for cooking. Asking for all their empty vessels was like asking someone today, can I borrow all your empty Tupperware, your empty suitcases, and that spare room you're not using? It was a massive, inconvenient, and deeply weird request. Theologians still debate whether her neighbour's compliance was its own small miracle. Did God go before her, softening their hearts? Or were they just so afraid of the prophet, or so weirded out by her request, that they handed over the pots just to make her go away? It's a bit of a how to get rid of a door-to-door salesman vibe. Here, take the pot, just please leave me alone. Her sons are mortified, their friends are watching, the whole village is buzzing. Did you see? The widow's collecting pots, hundreds of them. The prophet's got her on some strange errand, completely mad. But as she goes, something in her shifts. The first door was agony. The 10th door was just embarrassing. The 20th door was just a job. Her shame is being burned away by the simple, repetitive motion of obedience. Knock, ask, receive, carry, repeat. She has a task. She has a command. The pile in her house is growing. It's a glorious, chaotic, mismatched army of empty vessels. Big ones, small ones, cracked ones, new ones. Her tiny house is now so full of pots there's barely room to walk. Spiritual lesson. Obedience is the antidote to humiliation. The prophet's command was designed to be humiliating. It forced her to confront her shame, her poverty, and her community's pity all head on. She couldn't hide. She had to publicly demonstrate her obedience to a command that made her look like a fool. But in the act of obeying, the humiliation lost its power. Her focus shifted from, "What do they think of me?" to "I have to get more pots." So often, God's instructions require us to do something that feels beneath us, or that looks absurd to the world. We're asked to forgive the unforgivable, to give when we have nothing, to take a step of faith that looks like a step off a cliff. And the shame, the fear of what they will think, is often the single biggest barrier. This widow shows us that the only way through the shame is the simple, brute force act of obedience. Just do the thing. Knock on the next door, get the next pot. Her house is now full. She and her sons stand in the tiny remaining space, panting, sweating, surrounded by a mountain of empty clay. They have done it. They have gathered, as Elisha commanded, not a few. She and her sons stand in the one remaining clear patch of floor, panting. The job is done. The house is no longer empty. It is, in fact, dangerously, absurdly full. It's full of emptiness. Let's just paint this picture. Her one-room house is now an archaeological dig site waiting to happen. There are pots everywhere. Big, shoulder-high pithoi for grain storage are lined against the walls, their round mouths gaping open. Medium-sized water jars are clustered in the corners. Smaller flasks, cooking pots, and household bowls are stacked precariously, one inside the other, creating wobbly clay towers. It's the world's most stressful game of Jenga. The light from the high window is different now, fragmented as it bounces off the curved earthenware bellies of 100 vessels. The air is thick with the dry, dusty mineral smell of clay. To get from the door to the sleeping mats, they would have to turn sideways and shuffle. Her sons are looking at her, their faces a perfect blend of confusion and exhaustion. This was hard work. Clay pots are heavy. They have just spent the last hour or two doing hard manual labour for a purpose they cannot possibly understand. They are surrounded by a mountain of borrowed pottery, and outside, the creditor. He's still there. He has watched this entire bizarre parade. He has seen his assets, the two boys, being used as delivery men for a pile of worthless second-hand junk. His patience must be worn down to a single frayed thread. He's probably shaking his head, convinced the entire family has gone mad with grief. This isn't a solution. This is a distraction. This is a farce. But inside, the widow is not looking at the creditor anymore. She's looking at the pots. She's looking at her compliance with the prophet's most baffling command. Do not gather just a few. This phrase in the original Hebrew is a powerful understatement. It's a litot. It doesn't just mean get a decent amount. It means get a lot. Get an unreasonable amount. Get more than you think you need. Get so many that it feels ridiculous. Keep going. This was the terrifying genius of Elisha's instruction. He didn't give her a number. He didn't say, go and get 50 pots. If he had, she would have gone and dutifully collected exactly 50. Instead, he gave her a blank check. He made her decide the scale of her own deliverance. How much did she want? How much could she believe for? How much was she willing to work for? How much shame was she willing to endure? Every yes from a neighbour was a small victory. Every pot carried home was an act of faith. And at some point she must have stopped. She and her sons looked at the teetering, chaotic pile, and she made a decision. That's it. That's enough. We're too tired. Or, we can't fit a single other pot in here. Or, we've asked everyone. I can't bear to knock on another door. She set the limit. She didn't know it, but in that moment she defined the exact boundaries of her coming miracle. She had gathered not a few. She had gathered many, but she had not gathered all. There were still other pots in the village, but she had reached her personal capacity for obedience. This is a fascinating historical detail. Pottery was the backbone of the ancient household. It was their Tupperware, their moving boxes, their bank vaults, their water bottles. But it was also fragile. In any given house, you'd find a mix of new, sturdy pots and older ones that were cracked and mended with bitumen or ties. This widow was likely given the B list, the cracked ones, the ones in storage, the ones they didn't mind loaning to the town bankrupt. She had gathered the villagers empty, but also their unwanted. Her house was now a sanctuary of the second-rate, a temple of the cast-offs. Theologians still discuss the psychology of Elisha's command. Was he testing her obedience? Absolutely. Was he testing her stamina? Clearly. But was he also testing her desire? Was he in this moment asking her, "How badly do you want this? How much of a new life are you willing to prepare for?" She came to him asking to pay off a single debt. Elisha, with this command, is hinting at a solution that goes far beyond just breaking even. He's offering her a new business. He's offering her wealth. The question is, how much wealth can she handle? How much can she even imagine? It's a quirky, almost New Agey idea, but it has roots in ancient thought. The concept of horror vacui, the idea that nature abhors a vacuum. By instructing her to gather this massive collective nothing, Elisha was having her construct a physical vacuum so vast that God's abundance would be compelled to rush in and fill it. She wasn't just collecting pots, she was building the miracle. She was the architect of her own provision. The more emptiness she prepared, the more something God was obliged to provide. She and her sons stand there in the silence. The hard part is over, or so she thinks. They have done the physical labour, they have endured the public humiliation, they have obeyed the strange command. Now, presumably, she has to go back to Elisha and say, "Okay, the house is full of junk. What's step 2? This instruction, "Do not gather a few," is the hidden engine of the whole story. If she had come back with 5 pots, she would have gotten 5 pots of oil. It would have been a nice little miracle, maybe enough to sell and appease the creditor for a month. It would have been a temporary fix. But Elisha wasn't interested in a temporary fix. He was aiming for total liberation. He wanted her debt paid. He wanted her future secured. And to do that, he needed her to be a co-conspirator. He needed her to be as all in on the solution as she was on the problem. She had been all in on her despair. Now he was asking her to be all in on her preparation. Spiritual lesson. God will often fill our capacity, but he rarely overrules it. We are the ones who set the size of the container. We come to God with our thimble-sized expectations and our teacup-sized prayers, and then we wonder why we're not receiving an ocean of blessing. We say, "God, I just need enough to get by." And God, through Elisha, is saying, "I'm offering you an abundance. I'm offering you more than enough. But you have to go get the pots. You have to prepare for the abundance you say you want." How many of us stop gathering pots because we get tired? Because we feel foolish? Because we think, "This is probably good enough"? This widow, in her exhaustion, gathered a lot. She did more than the minimum. She gathered an unreasonable, ridiculous, house-filling number of pots. She has, through her obedience, set the stage for a miracle that is just as big as her faith, just as big as her work ethic, and just as big as her living room. She's done it. She and her sons are standing in the middle of their home, which now looks less like a house and more like a pottery warehouse that's failed its safety inspection. They are surrounded. They are walled in by the very emptiness they went to collect. The air is still and dusty, and outside the creditor is clearing his throat. The sun is starting to dip lower in the sky. The shadow in the doorway has lengthened. His patience is gone. This empty pot charade was the final straw. He's done waiting. We can imagine him rapping his knuckles on the doorframe. Enough of this madness. The hour is late. Send out the boys. The widow's blood runs cold. She has done the absurd, humiliating task, and for what? The creditor is still here. The problem has not gone away. She must have sent one of her sons running back to Elisha. "Tell him we have the pots. Tell him the man is still here. What do we do now?" Or perhaps Elisha had given her the full set of instructions from the beginning, and she was just now steeling herself for the second, even stranger part of the plan. The text says Elisha told her, "Go, borrow, and when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, then pour it into all those vessels." This is the next command, shut the door. This is, in many ways, an even greater act of faith than borrowing the pots. Borrowing the pots was humiliating, but shutting the door is an act of pure, defiant rebellion. The creditor is standing right there. He is the personification of her problem. He is the secular law. He is the wolf at the door. And Elisha, the man of God, instructs her to shut the door in his face. She has to walk from the centre of her pot-filled room to the threshold, where this man is standing, his face a thundercloud. He has the legal right to be there. He has the power. He has the claim on her sons. She reaches the door. He probably holds up a hand. "No, Mum, I'm not leaving. We're done here." And she has to look him in the eye. This man who holds her family's future in his ledger, and she has to physically move him out of the way. She has to put her hand on the heavy wooden door and close it, pushing his face and his demands and his legal claims out into the street, where they belong. The sound of the door closing is a thud. Then the sound of the wooden bar sliding into its bracket. A heavy final click. She has just locked out her crisis. She turns and leans against the door, her heart hammering. The house is suddenly dark, lit only by the faint light from the high window and perhaps a single sputtering oil lamp. The silence is absolute, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the terrified, shallow breaths of her two sons. And then, muffled, furious pounding from the other side. The creditor is enraged. He is yelling, "Open this door! You can't hide! This is foolishness! I'll be back with the authorities!" And she has to ignore it. She has to tune it out. This is the test. Can she focus on the prophet's instruction while the devil is having a tantrum on her doorstep? This instruction to shut the door is profound. Theologians still debate whether this was a practical instruction or a spiritual one. Was it practical to prevent the nosy neighbours from seeing the miracle and causing a riot? Was it to keep them from seeing her sudden wealth and either demanding a share or worse, robbing her? Or was it to keep the creditor from barging in mid-miracle and seizing the oil as it was being poured? It was likely all of those, but it was something more. It was spiritual. Elisha was commanding her to create a sacred sealed space. This was not a miracle for public consumption. This was not a show for the village. This was an intimate, private act of provision between a desperate family and their God. Miracles, it seems, often require an incubator. They need a place free from the contamination of doubt, scoffing, and the common sense objections of the world. If a neighbour had been watching, they would have said, "What are you doing? That's a tiny flask. You'll get half a cup and then you'll look like a fool." If the creditor had seen it, he would have laughed. "That's your plan? A bottle of perfume?" By shutting the door, Elisha was protecting the fragile embryonic miracle from the voices of impossibility. He was telling her, "This is just for you, your sons, and God. No one else gets to be in this room." Here's a quirky historical tidbit. In the ancient world, the door of a peasant house was often just a heavy mat or a single, poorly fitted wooden plank. It wasn't a bank vault door. The fact that she could shut it and bar it implies a level of security, but also a deliberate act. Shutting the door was a public signal. It meant do not disturb. It meant family business. It meant we are closed to the world. She has done it. The creditor's shouts are fading, or at least she's forcing them to fade from her mind. Now it's just her boys, and the pots, a mountain of expectant, empty clay. She turns to her sons. "Bring me the flask." One of them retrieves it. The one small, insignificant esk of oil. The accept. And then she takes the first empty pot from the pile. Spiritual lesson. Faith requires a deliberate focus that actively shuts out the voice of the crisis. You cannot at the same time listen to the voice of God and the voice of your creditor. You cannot be in a state of miracle reception and a state of panic analysis. At some point you have to make a choice. You have to symbolically or even literally shut the door on the problem. This means shutting the door on the what-ifs, shutting the door on the how is this even possible, shutting the door on the pounding, insistent demands of your fear, your past, and your due dates. It is an act of profound, focused stillness. It's the moment you stop telling God how big your problem is and you start listening to his instruction, and only his instruction, in the quiet, consecrated darkness of your own shut-in space. The room is silent. The work is about to begin. The heavy thud of the bar sliding into place echoes in the now darkened room. It is done. The creditor, the crisis, the world, and all its reasonable, unfeeling demands are on the other side of that door. His muffled shouts are just a dull, angry rhythm, a storm that can't get in. Inside there is a new, profound silence. It's broken only by the sound of 3 people breathing. The widow leans against the door for a second, her eyes closed, her heart a trapped bird in her chest. She has done it. She has obeyed. Now what? She opens her eyes. The room is a landscape of clay, a maze of empty, expectant mouths. Her two sons are huddled together, their faces pale in the single flicker of the lamp. They are terrified. They have seen their mother go from weeping to running, to haggardly collecting junk, and now to locking them all in a dark room while a furious man pounds on their door. This is, to be blunt, the worst day of their lives. The widow looks at her boys, the very reason for this terror, the ones who were about to be taken, and this is where the miracle becomes a family enterprise. This is not just the widow's miracle, it is theirs. They are the ones the creditor came for, and they will be the ones who participate in their own redemption. She straightens up, moving from the door. Her voice is probably a raw whisper, but it's firm. "Son," she says to the older one, "bring me a vessel, one of the large ones." Then to the younger, You take them when they're full and set them against the wall, make a new pile." She has just created an assembly line. This is no longer a household, it's a factory. It's a divine bottling plant. Here's a simple historical fact. Children in the ancient world were not cherished, fragile ornaments as they are in much of ours. They were essential parts of the household economy. From the moment they could walk, they had chores. They fetched water. They gleaned fields. They herded goats. Her sons, who were old enough to be taken as debt slaves, were more than old enough to work. This strange, supernatural task was now their new and most important job. The older son, his hands trembling, shuffles through the maze of pottery and drags a medium-sized water jar, placing it at his mother's feet. It's empty. He knows it is. He's the one who carried it here. The widow then does the most faith-filled act of the entire story. She picks up her asuk, her one tiny insignificant flask of oil, the accept. It's all she has. She looks at the small palm-sized container, and then she looks at the gaping empty mouth of the jar her son just brought her. This is the moment. This is where the prophet's crazy talk meets reality. This is where she will either be vindicated or proven to be a complete fool. She takes a breath. She holds the little flask over the big empty pot, and she tips it. Glug, glug, glug. A thin, fragrant stream of golden green olive oil, the good stuff, the anointing oil, leaves her tiny flask and splashes against the dry clay bottom of the borrowed pot. Her sons are watching, holding their breath. She keeps pouring, and she keeps pouring, and she keeps pouring. The small splash becomes a puddle. The puddle becomes a pool. The oil rises up the sides of the large jar. The sound of the pouring is steady, liquid, and impossible. The little flask in her hand does not run dry. It's not gushing like a fire hose. That would be too dramatic, too messy. The text implies a simple, steady, controlled flow. It's a quiet, domestic, orderly miracle. It just doesn't stop. The older son's eyes go wide. The younger son makes a small choked sound. The oil level in the large jar reaches the rim. It's full. "Stop," the widow whispers, tipping her flask back. She's holding a full flask. She's looking at a full jar. "Next," she says. Her voice doesn't tremble anymore. The older son, now galvanized, shoves the full, heavy pot toward his younger brother, who grunts as he slides it carefully into the corner. The older son immediately grabs another empty one and hauls it in front of his mother. She tips the flask. Glug, glug, glug. The impossible stream begins again. This is the work. It's quiet. It's methodical. It's mundane. It's work. This isn't a zap miracle. This is a process. Theologians and scholars still discuss the significance of the son's involvement. Was it merely practical? Did she just need the extra hands to move the heavy oil-filled pots? Or was it deeply spiritual? Were these two boys, the very collateral that was in default, being revalued? They were being shown in real time that God's provision for them was not a gift from a stranger, but something they had a hand in making. They were moving from being passive victims of the economy to active participants in God's economy. They weren't just being saved, they were being employed in their own salvation. It's a quirky and wonderful detail to imagine the sound in that room. Outside, the muffled, angry, masculine shouts of the creditor. Inside, the scraping of clay on the earth floor, the heavy breathing of the two boys, and the steady, liquid, miracle sound of the oil. Glug, glug, glug. It's the sound of their future being poured out. It's the sound of their debt being erased. It's the sound of a new family business being born in a dark, locked room. They fall into a rhythm. Scrape. Glug. 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 Scrape, scrape, glug, 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 scrape. The pile of empty borrowed vessels starts to shrink. The pile of full, sealed with provision vessels starts to grow. Spiritual lesson. God's miracles often require our active, mundane participation. We want the miracle without the work. We want the provision without the pouring. We want God to just drop the fully formed solution into our laps. But this story shows us that God partners with us. He provided the supernatural source, the oil, but he required the widow and her sons to provide the human labour. They had to borrow the pots, shut the door, and then do the work of pouring, vessel by vessel, until the job was done. Faith is not just sitting and waiting. Faith is shutting the door on the crisis and then getting to work on the solution. Even when the work itself, the simple act of pouring from one pot to another, seems impossibly mundanely simple. The miracle was in the mundane repetition of her obedience. The oil begins to flow. It's a simple, steady stream. It's not a violent, gushing torrent. It's not a flashy, sparkling cascade. It is a quiet, golden-green, fragrant stream of high-grade oil pouring from a tiny flask that simply refuses to empty. It is the most beautiful, the most impossible, the most boring miracle, and it is glorious. The three of them are working in a focused, rhythmic, factory-like hush. The older son scrapes an empty pot across the floor. Scrape. He places it before his mother. She tips the flask. Glug, 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 glug. The steady liquid sound fills the small dark room. The oil rises, a perfect golden circle, until it nearly kisses the rim. She tips the flask back. The younger son grunts, sliding the new, heavy, full vessel across the floor to join the growing army of fullness in the corner. Scrape! Glug, glug, glug! Grunt! Scrape! This is the sound of their redemption. It is the sound of the creditor's claim being nullified, pour by pour. Outside, the creditor's pounding has likely stopped. Maybe he's given up and gone home, resolving to come back with soldiers. Maybe he's just sitting on the ground outside her door, waiting stubbornly for this foolishness to end. It doesn't matter. He is no longer part of their world. They have shut him out. Their world is this room. Their world is this rhythm. Their world is this smell. And oh, the smell. This is our quirky, wonderful tidbit. This was almost certainly not the crude greenish sludge they'd burn in lamps. The text hints this was a special oil, an asuk, a flask for anointing. This means it was likely perfumed. The small, stuffy mud brick room, which moments before smelled of dust, fear and poverty, is now overwhelmingly, intoxicatingly filled with the rich, sacred fragrance of myrrh, or cassia, or spikenard. It is the smell of wealth. It is the smell of worship. It is the smell of a king's palace, and it is filling a widow's hovel. They are literally breathing in the aroma of their own deliverance. The older son, at first, was probably just focused on the mechanics. Get the pot. Move the pot. But now, after the 20th or 30th vessel, the sheer, staggering, physics-defying impossibility of it all is sinking in. His mother is holding the same small flask she started with. It's not attached to a pipe. There is no hole in the ceiling, but the oil, it just keeps coming. He watches the stream, mesmerized. Theologians still debate the how of this miracle. Was the oil multiplying inside the tiny flask, which was itself a bottomless well? Or was the flask just a conduit, a symbolic wand that triggered a creative event inside the larger empty vessels, causing them to fill from the bottom up? Frankly, it doesn't matter. To the boy, it's just magic. It's his God, the God his father served, doing something that makes the world turn upside down. And the widow, her panic is gone. Her grief is not gone, but it is suspended. Her eyes are not on the door, they are on the oil. Her hands are steady. She's no longer a victim, she's a manager. She's the foreman of a divine factory. She's the proprietor of a supernatural oil business. She's focused, she's determined, and for the first time since her husband's last breath, the knot of terror in her stomach is gone. This is work. This is a crucial detail. God did not snap his fingers and fill the pots. He made them do it. He made them haul the heavy clay. He made them pour. He made them organize the room. This miracle required their sweat. It was a partnership. God provided the source, but they had to provide the labor. And as they work, they are being transformed. The sons, who woke up this morning as victims, as assets to be seized, are now businessmen. They are moving inventory, they are handling product, they are not slaves in waiting, they are sons of the prophet, and they are learning in the most hands-on way imaginable how their father's economy works. The pile of emptiness she had gathered with such shame is shrinking. The pile of fullness she's creating with such awe is growing. This brings us to the core economic fact of the story. In the ancient Near East, olive oil was money. It was a staple commodity, as basic and as essential as wheat, wine, or wool. A house full of high-grade oil was not just stocked up, it was wealthy. People paid taxes in oil, soldiers were paid in oil. It was used for cooking, medicine, cosmetics, and of course, as fuel for every lamp that pushed back the night. What is happening in this room is not just a provision, it is a colossal, staggering, life-altering transfer of wealth. Elisha has not just given her a handout to pay the creditor. He has given her a business, he has given her capital, he has given her a product. She is, in the span of a few hours, becoming one of the most significant oil merchants in her entire village. The miracle continues. Scrap! Glug, glug, glug. Grunt. They've been at this for a while now. They're all sweating, despite the dim light. The room is hot. The fragrance is almost overpowering. The floor is probably slick in places where a few precious drops have spilled. The pile of empty pots, which had seemed like a mountain, is now just a small cluster of stragglers. The pile of full pots. It's a wall. It's a barricade of abundance. The house is more full now than it was when it was full of emptiness. The widow feels a change in her own body. Her arms ache from holding the flask. Her back aches from bending. But her heart is light. She looks at her sons. Their tunics are stained with oil. Their faces are streaked with sweat and dust, but their eyes are shining. They are not the same boys who are huddled in the corner, white with fear. She grabs the next to last empty pot. Glug, glug, glug. It fills. Her older son grabs the last small cracked pot. The one a neighbour probably threw in as an afterthought. Here, you can have this old thing. He places it before her. It is the last one. Spiritual lesson. God's provision is often a process of multiplication, not a single act of creation. We want the zap. We want the instantaneous, effortless miracle. We pray for a solution, and we want to wake up with it fully formed. But this story reveals a God who honours the process. He honours the glug, glug, glug. He honours the rhythmic, mundane, faithful labour of pouring what you have into what you've prepared. The miracle was not in the flask alone, it was in the flow between the flask and the vessels. God was teaching this family in real time that His abundance is released through our obedient, repetitive, and often unglamorous partnership with Him. The oil flowed as long as they did the work of preparing, pouring, and receiving. Scrape! The older son pushes the very last pot in front of his mother. It's a small one, an ugly squat thing, maybe cracked near the lip. It's the pot that a neighbour almost didn't bother to give her, the absolute dregs of the village's unwanted emptiness. The widow, her arm aching, her tunic soaked in sweat, doesn't hesitate. She's in the rhythm, she's in the flow. She tips her small, inexhaustible flask. Glug, glug, glug. The fragrant oil streams out, a steady golden promise. It fills the small, cracked vessel, rising right to the lip, seeming to pause there, full and heavy. She tips the flask back. She looks at her older son. Bring me another vessel. It's not a question, it's a command. She is the foreman of this factory and the line is still running. The boy, his face slick with sweat and grime, looks at her. He looks at the corner where the empty pots used to be. There is nothing there. It's just a dark, empty space on the floor. He looks at the massive, fragrant wall of full pots his brother is guarding. He frantically scans the room, his eyes darting into every shadow, behind every large jar, just in case he missed one. He looks back at his mother, his eyes wide with a new kind of panic. Not the panic of lack, but the panic of finality. His voice is a squeak. There is not another vessel. And the Bible, in its perfect, stark economy of words, says, "Then the oil stayed. It didn't sputter, it didn't dry up, it didn't run out, it stayed." The word in Hebrew is amad, to stand, to cease, to stop. The miracle, which was in full glorious flow, just turned off like a faucet. The widow is holding the flask tipped forward, but the stream has vanished. She looks at the flask. It's not empty. It feels just as it did when she started. It's still heavy with its infinite, impossible supply. But the connection is broken. The flow has ceased. The three of them stand there in the hot, dark, silent room. The only sound is their own breathing and the almost deafening smell of a king's ransom in perfumed oil. The quiet that floods the room is louder than the creditor's pounding ever was. The glug, glug, glug has stopped. The work is over. This is the most profound and terrifying moment of the entire story. Theologians for centuries have debated the core question of this miracle. Did the oil stop because God's supply ran out, or because the widow's capacity ran out? The text is unambiguous. The limiting factor was not God, it was the pots. God's supply was and is infinite. The flask was bottomless. He was prepared to keep pouring. He would have filled 1,000 pots. He would have filled a stadium. He would have filled a valley. He was ready to give her more. But she ran out of empty. In that moment, a complex, overwhelming wave of emotions must have washed over the widow. First, a staggering, bone-deep gratitude. She looks at the small, dark room, which is now a fortress of wealth. She is safe. Her sons are safe. The creditor is an irrelevant ghost. She has won. But then, just for a second, a flicker of a different, more human feeling. The dawning, awful, breathtaking realization, I could have had more. She thinks of that neighbour who said no. What if she had pleaded? What if she had argued? She thinks of that street she skipped because it was getting late and she was tired. She thinks of her own decision to stop, to say, this is enough. This is ridiculous. The house is full. She defined the miracle. She, with her own hands, her own assumptions, and her own exhaustion, had drawn the line. God had simply honoured it. This brings us to a crucial historical fact about the business she was now in. Oil was a major economic driver. A single large storage jar, a pithos, could hold 10 to 20 gallons. She had a house full of them. Archaeologists in Israel have found ancient administrative centres where taxes were recorded, and they were paid in measures of wheat, wine, and oil. A core of oil, about 60 gallons, was a standard high-value unit of exchange. She didn't just have some oil. She had commercial, taxable, industrial quantity. She was, as of this moment, an oil baron. And as she looks at this sea of pots, our quirky tidbit comes to mind. In the ancient world, many potters, even for everyday wear, would press their thumb or a small, carved seal into the soft clay of the handle or rim, a potter's mark. As she looks at her new inventory, she would see a dozen different brands. There's Mrs. Sheemy's pot, with the little fish stamp. There's the potter from the next village over, whose pots were known to be sturdy. Her wealth was a mosaic, a collection of her entire community's identity, each piece borrowed in shame and now filled with glory. Her sons, who had been working like automatons, finally collapse. They sit on the floor, their backs against a wall of full jars, their expression stunned. They are looking at their mother. What just happened? She, the widow, the nothing woman, is standing in the centre of the room, holding the flask that is still, impossibly, full. The miracle stayed. It stopped. It was over. She had gathered not a few, and her miracle was not a small one, but it was finished. It was exactly as big as her obedience. This is the new crisis. It is the problem of abundance. What do you do when God answers your prayer so completely that it creates a whole new set of logistical problems? What do you do with a house full of oil? You can't drink it. You can't hide it. The smell has probably already seeped out from under the door, announcing to the whole village that something strange has happened in the widow's house. The creditor is forgotten. The debt is trivial. The new question is, now what? Spiritual lesson. God's supply is infinite, but his provision is often poured into the specific capacity we prepare. He is a God of more than enough, but he honours the vessels we bring him. He doesn't force his blessings on us. He asks us to gather vessels. He asks us to prepare for the miracle, and so often, like this widow, we stop gathering. We get tired, we feel foolish, we think, this must be enough. We set the limit. God's grace, his power, his provision, it's an infinite well. The only question is, how many empty pots are we willing to go out and collect? The widow, standing in the fragrant silence, knows what she has to do. Her first act of obedience is over. The second is about to begin. She has to go back to the prophet. She came to him with a problem of lack. Now she must return to him with the problem of abundance. The room is still. The three of them stand in the fragrant, oily silence, surrounded by a treasure they didn't have an hour ago. The miracle is over. The glug 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 has stopped. They are left in the aftermath of the impossible. The widow looks at the wall of full pots. She looks at the small, cracked pot at her feet. The last one. She looks at her tiny flask, still, inexplicably heavy in her hand. Her older son was right. There is not another vessel. The oil has stayed. And now, a new feeling begins to creep in, replacing the awe. It's a new kind of panic, a high-class problem. What do I do now? Her house is a fire hazard. It's an unguarded bank vault. It's a logistical nightmare. The sheer weight of the oil is staggering. A single large pithos jar could hold 15 gallons, and 15 gallons of oil weighs over 100 pounds. Her house, with its mud brick walls and packed earth floor, is now straining under the weight of wealth. The smell, that glorious sacred perfume, is a liability. It's seeping from under the barred door. It's clinging to her clothes and her son's clothes. Anyone walking past the house will know immediately that something is inside, not just some oil, a lot of oil. She's a target. And the creditor. He's still out there, or he's coming back. And what's to stop him from claiming this? Ah! You did have an asset. I'm seizing this oil. She doesn't know the rules for this. There is no line in the law of Moses that says, in case of a supernatural multiplication of anointing oil. She came to Elisha with a problem of lack. Now, she has to go back to him with the far more complex problem of abundance. She looks at her sons. Stay here. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone. She slides the bar back. The click sounds deafeningly loud. She slips out, pulling the door shut, and hears the bar slide back into place. And now, her second walk. The first time she ran to Elisha, she was a frantic, weeping, dishevelled mess. She was a woman running from a crisis, her clothes smelling of dust and poverty and fear. This time, she walks. Her head is high. She's stunned, yes, but she's no longer desperate. And she reeks of wealth. She's a walking advertisement for her miracle. As she walks through the village, the same neighbours who loaned her the empty pots are probably catching the scent. They smell her before they see her. She's a cloud of myrrh and provision. She arrives at Elisha's door. She knocks. He opens it, and he is, as always, calm. He doesn't look surprised. He looks expectant. The text says, "Then she came and told the man of God." We don't get the words, but we can imagine the scene. She doesn't fall at his feet this time. She just stands in his doorway, her hands probably stained with oil, her face a mask of awe. It worked. I filled all the pots. The oil, it just stopped. We ran out of pots. My house is full. And then the same terror, but in a different key. What do I do now? This is the new inventory. The first inventory was, what do you have in the house? And the answer was, nothing except a pot of oil. This new inventory is, I have a house full of oil. What do I do with it? She has the product. She has the supply. But she has no business plan. She has no distribution network. She has no sales team. She is a producer, not a merchant. And this is where Elisha, the man of God, the mystic, the prophet, becomes a financial advisor. He is not just a spiritual guide, he is a practical consultant. This reveals a deep historical truth. In the ancient world, there was no separation between sacred and secular. A prophet was just as concerned with a widow's debt-to-asset ratio as he was with a king's idolatry. A miracle wasn't just to prove God's power, it was to solve a real-world economic problem permanently. Theologians and scholars have often marvelled at the completeness of this miracle. God could have just given her a bag of silver. He could have struck the creditor with a sudden case of amnesia. That would have solved the problem, but it wouldn't have solved her problem. Her problem wasn't just the debt, it was her poverty. It was her lack of a future. Elisha's plan, from the very beginning, wasn't just a rescue. It was a restructuring. He wasn't just giving her a fish. He was setting her up with a fully stocked supernatural fish market. A quirky, practical tidbit is the concept of selling this oil. She couldn't just put a sign on her door. That would invite the creditor and every thief in the kingdom. She would have to sell it discreetly and quickly to a caravan merchant or an oil merchant at the city gates who would have the means to transport it in large quantities, likely in sealed animal skins. This was a major commercial transaction. Elisha is about to give her the executive summary of her new business. She stands before him, awaiting the final instruction. She came to him as a victim. He sent her back as a labourer. She has returned as a manager. And now he's about to commission her as an entrepreneur. Spiritual lesson. God's solution is not just to pay your debt, but to give you a new life. We pray for just enough. God, just get me through this month. Just pay this one bill. We come to him with a problem of lack. But God's economy is the economy of more than enough. He doesn't just want to cancel your debt. He wants to give you an inheritance. He doesn't just want to solve your crisis. He wants to change your identity. He took a weeping widow and, through a process of humiliating obedience and hard work, he transformed her into a business owner, a provider, and a woman of means. The miracle didn't just fill her pots. It filled her and her sons with a new future. She is standing before Elisha, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle. She stands before him, a woman transformed. She's no longer the frantic, weeping victim who pounded on his door. She's a producer, a manager, an entrepreneur, a woman who has just supervised a divine manufacturing process, and she's waiting for her final orders. She came to him with a problem of a lack. She returns to him with a problem of abundance. Elisha, the calm prophet who has been her anchor, looks at this woman. He sees her, stained with oil, smelling of a king's ransom, her eyes wide with the terror of her new magnificent burden. He doesn't pause, he doesn't need to pray, he doesn't need to seek the Lord. He knew the end of this plan from the moment he asked her, "What do you have in the house?" He gives her the final two-part instruction. It is the most beautiful, practical, and world-altering business plan ever delivered. "Go," he says, "sell the oil and pay your debt." This is part one. It's the practical, legal, necessary first step. Go. He sends her out again, back into the world she had to shut out. Sell the oil. He commissions her as a merchant. She must now take this sacred, miraculous product and engage in a secular, commercial transaction. She must enter the marketplace. This is a terrifying thought. She's a poor widow, not a commodities trader, but the command implies the ability. He wouldn't tell her to do it if it weren't possible. She will have to find a caravan master, a city merchant, or a royal steward, someone with the means to buy in bulk. She will have to haggle. She will have to demand a fair price for this high-grade perfumed oil. And then, the glorious phrase, "and pay your debt." This is the entire reason she came to him. This is the knot of her despair, and Elisha speaks of it as a simple line item on a budget. Pay your debt. He doesn't say, go and beg the creditor for mercy. He doesn't say, go and offer him a partial payment. He says pay it, in full. We can almost see the next scene. The creditor, furious, is coming back, maybe with village guards. He's here to seize the boys, and the widow calm meets him at the door. She doesn't hide, she doesn't weep. She simply holds up a small, heavy bag of silver. Or perhaps even better, she gestures to one of the large sealed jars of oil. You'll take your payment in product. Here it is. Sign the receipt. The look on that man's face, the utter, baffled, speechless shock. The power dynamic in that single transaction is forever reversed. She is no longer the debtor. He is no longer the creditor. They are simply two people concluding a business deal. The claim is broken. The note is cancelled. Her sons are, and always will be, free. This is justice. This is the righteousness of God's economy, which doesn't just forgive debt, it obliterates it. But Elisha isn't finished. That was just part one. That was the solution to her past. Then he gives her part two, the instruction for her future. And you and your sons live on the rest. The rest. Those two words are the sound of the abundance of God. Those two words are the more than enough. Those two words are the answer to a prayer she didn't even know she could pray. She hadn't come to Elisha asking to be set for life. She had come asking for rescue from slavery. She had come asking for enough to pay the bill. She had a scarcity mindset, born of her desperate, empty pantry reality. Elisha, and the God he served, had an abundance mindset. The miracle was never just about breaking even. God is not in the business of just enough. He is in the business of the overflow. He is the God of the rest. The rest implies a massive surplus. She had gathered not a few vessels, and the rest was not a small amount of capital. She had enough to pay a crippling family-ending debt and have enough left over to live on. Not just for a week, not just for a year. The text implies a new, sustainable life. She has just been given the startup capital for a new future. She and her sons are now, quite literally, set. This brings us to a beautiful, quirky and unwritten part of the story. What about the pots? They were borrowed. This is our final historical tidbit. Her new life, her new business, her new freedom was built entirely on borrowed infrastructure, and in that ancient reciprocal village economy, she had to return them. Can you imagine that final walk? The widow and her sons, their debts paid, their future secure, now carrying the empty pots back to their neighbours. Mrs. Shimi opens the door, and here is this woman, the one who was a weeping, bankrupt disgrace just yesterday. She is calm, she is clean, she smells faintly of myrrh. She hands back the empty pot. "Thank you for the loan. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Shime would ask, confused, and the widow would just smile, a small, quiet, dignified smile. Yes, God has provided. She doesn't explain. She doesn't have to. The miracle was never for them. It was for her. She was not obligated to tell the story. She was only obligated to live in the reality of its results. This walk, returning the pots, is the reverse of the walk of shame. It is a walk of quiet, inexplicable, unassailable triumph. The story ends here. The camera fades. We don't see her sell the oil. We don't see her pay the creditor. We don't see her sons grow up. The text just leaves us with the prophet's final command: go, sell, pay, and live. It's a command that echoes down to us tonight. Spiritual lesson. God's ultimate plan is not just to cancel your past, but to fund your future. We are so focused on the debt of our sin, the debt of our mistakes, the debt of our past, and we come to God just like the widow, begging him to just fix it, make it go away, and he does. But his plan is so much bigger. He doesn't just want to bring you back to zero. He wants to bring you into the overflow. He wants to give you the rest. The miracle of the widow's oil is the story of a God whose provision is always, always, exceedingly abundantly above all we could ask or think. He doesn't just give us daily bread. He gives us a house full of oil, a new business, and a command to live in the overflow. And so, our story ends. Not with a shout, but in the quiet, fragrant stillness of a small house that is no longer empty. The creditor is gone. His voice is no longer a threat. The door is barred, not in fear, but for the night. The two boys who began this day on the auction block of a cruel economy are asleep on their mats. They are safe. They are free. Their future, which had been a terrifying void, is now a solid, tangible thing, resting in the shadows of the pots that line their walls. The widow, we can imagine, does not sleep. Not yet. She sits in the darkness, just breathing. She is breathing in the scent of her own deliverance. The smell of oil, a smell that will forever, for her, be the smell of God's impossible provision. She's no longer a victim. She's no longer a debtor. She's a woman who was asked, "What do you have?" and who dared to show God her nothing. And he, in his infinite, strange and merciful way, turned her nothing into everything. As you get comfortable, as you let the last of your own day fade, think of that oil. Think of that quiet, steady, impossible flow. It's a story that's perfect for the moments when our own creditors, our worries, our fears, our not-enoughs are pounding at the door. It's a reminder that God's solutions are rarely what we expect, but they are always more than we need. He is the God of the rest. He is the God who doesn't just pay the bill, he buys the whole company. So let your own worries be silent, shut the door on them, trust in the quiet, steady flow of his grace. Let's pray. Father, thank you for tonight's story and the wisdom it carries. Thank you for being the God of the overflow, the God of the rest. Teach us to see the accept in our own nothing. Give us the courage to obey your strange instructions, to shut the door on our fears, and to trust in your provision. Bless everyone listening tonight. Give them peace, give them rest, and show them your abundance. In Jesus' name, amen.